So before I hop into Flosum, I did want to review Flosum's architecture and how Flosum is offered to our customers, which is one of two ways. The first way being is Flosum will provision an enterprise production org for you, where Flosum will be installed. From there, you can connect your dev sandboxes, scratch orgs, and production orgs. The second option being is you can install Flosum right into your existing production org. Now, you're not going to lose any functionality that way. The only difference is that Flosum will not be totally separate from your business and IT processes. So with that being said, I'm going to hop into Flosum, and throughout this demo, I'm really going to be taking the role of a developer, working through a user story, pulling my components into Flosum, and then working through the development process. So switching to Flosum, by default, you're going to be taken to your homepage every time you log in. This is a Kanban board, which is going to be super useful for your release managers and Scrum Masters. Here we can see a high-level overview of exactly where each branch sits and the status of it, which will update in real time. So the branch I'm going to be working off today is the feature branch. And here we can see we already have 24 issues found with my static code analysis, which I do have preloaded up here. And as I eventually deploy this integrated dev, this feature branch will update. So with that being said, as a developer, I'm assigned a user story. And first thing I always want to do is create a branch. So within Flosum, under the branches tab, I've already created this feature branch, but really it's as simple as clicking new and just giving it a unique branch name, really a 5 to 10 second process. Once that feature branch is created, next thing I want to do is tie my user story to it. Out of the box, Flosum does integrate with all of the big requirements tools such as Jira, ADO, and ServiceNow. For this example, I'll just use my Jira and I can tie my user story to it. So I can search for my Jira ticket. I can search for keywords in that summary. And here's my update class, trigger, and layout, and I can link this to the object. This is going to be super useful for your project managers and release managers as well, just to see what the status is and where you are in this process. Another cool thing about this integration is it is bidirectional. So let's just say I sign a pull request to another developer, which I'll get to in a couple minutes. If they were to find a bug in one of my page layouts, for example, we can create a bug all from within the same screen. That will also be reflected in your Jira instance in real time as well. So switching to the manifest tab, this is where your branch components are going to be. And at this point, everyone is probably wondering, one, how did I get my components into Flosum? And two, how did I commit them to my branch? So I'm going to take a step back and really show you just that. So over here in the orgs tab, similar to that PowerPoint slide I just showed, this is where you're going to be able to connect all of your sandboxes, QA, int dev, scratch orgs, whatever it may be. But for this use case, I know I developed my user story in my dev1 sandbox. So clicking on this org, as developers and admins make changes in their sandbox, Flosum is going to automatically detect these changes and pull them into this latest component section. Naturally, developers and admins could be touching components that aren't necessarily relevant to their user story. So if I click this commit to branch button, I can cherry pick exactly what components I want committed to my branch. Here, I could select my branch that I want them to, and here you can cherry pick. Naturally, this is going to be a pretty large file with almost 2,200 components. So if you want to quickly navigate to exactly what you want changed, you can always filter by your component type or by keywords to further filter down that criteria. This tool is going to be super useful for your admins since these are pretty much all declarative components. But if you're a developer, you're usually developing in VS Code or IntelliJ. So luckily, Flosum has integrations with both products, but I'll show VS Code for this demo. So Flosum CLI integration, I right click here, you can see that we can actually pull this source from the branch, repo, or the org. Once your developer makes those updates or creates a new class, they're comfortable and confident with the updates, we can push this source straight to the branch, really skipping that first step I just showed you. So now I'm going to switch back to Flosum, and if we just pretend that I cherry pick some of these and then commit to branch, it's going to lead me right to my branches page. So out of the box, once your components are committed to the branch, we do have two quality gates, and really those are first line of defense for one, cleaning up your code and just ensuring that it meets your compliance needs. So the first one I want to review is our code quality scan, and Flosum uses Apex PMD out of the box where you can configure your own rules and decide which rules you want to apply. So whenever I commit a visual force page, Apex class, or trigger, this is going to scan automatically in the background. So if I click on this code quality tab, you'll see that Flosum has detected 24 issues with my classes and triggers. Up top here, you're going to get a nice, pretty graph, not really too much detail telling you how many rules you broke. Scrolling down a bit further, it gets very descriptive. The rule name, what the error description is, the file that was impacted, and the position in that file. Again, this is really just the first line of defense, helping your developers clean up the quality of their code before merging or deploying to their target org. So going back to the branch, the second option I want to review is the pull request. So within Flosum, a pull request is simply a request for a peer code review. Now this can be enforced or it can be a nice to have. This can be enforced, meaning that you can define a certain amount of users that need to approve this before merging or deploying, or nice to have as if I assign this to a peer, if they get to it, great. If not, no big deal. I can just continue on the process. But for this example, I've actually logged in as another developer and assigned a pull request to myself. So in this instance, I'll really be taking the role of the reviewer. So whenever you get a pull request assigned to you, you're going to get an email looking exactly like this. So here I can see that Mary let me know that she wants me to review her account page layout. And if I click on this link, it's going to take me straight to this page here. That description is consistent, and I'll click review. So here we see the layout. The branch version is different than the repository version. So if I click on this little eyeball icon, I can see exactly what those differences are. On the left-hand side is giving my source file or my branch, and on the right-hand side is giving my repository, just for a basis of comparison. Flosum has detected 13 differences within the two files, and I can use these areas to quickly navigate to exactly what they are. So here we can see that green is a net new. These are probably part of my user story, and they don't yet exist in the repo yet. As you can see here, there's no real risk of a code overwrite. But red, on the other hand, it doesn't exist in my source file. So if I were to ever commit this to my repository, this rating field would be overwritten. If I'm the reviewer and I'm reviewing this against my JIRA requirements, and I'm ever wondering, why is this rating field missing? Maybe this was an accident. If that's ever the case, as a reviewer, you can click on any of these line numbers here and leave inline comments for that developer. So in this example here, I'll click on line 40 and leave a comment like, once I save this, whoever submitted that pull request will get an email notification and a link taking them straight to this page. For this demo, let's just pretend I saved this. And then as a reviewer, you can always approve or reject it. But again, let's just pretend I approve it. That way I can continue on with my process. So I'm going to click back here and go back to my branch. And the next step I wanted to show was Flosum's partial profile deployment. So we hear from a lot of our customers that profiles in general are very tough to migrate and manage. One, if you do deploy an entire profile, you always have that risk of bulldozing your peers' changes. The second option could be is you just complete your field level security changes as post-deployment steps, which just takes time. What Flosum has done is really automate this process. So as part of my user story, I gave read-write access to my system admin for this custom field. Now, when I get this profile, the only reference of that XML that's going to be migrated is just the read-write reference for that field. Here, I can sort by component name, and there's my admin profile. When I click get this usually takes about 20 seconds to run in the background. And really what Flosum's doing is comparing that admin XML file to the components in your branch, figuring out what relevant changes to pull in. So we'll give this 10 seconds to run and we'll be redirected to our branches tab. Here we can see that my admin profile was automatically added to my branch. And the next step in the process is to really run our impact analysis. And Flosum's impact analysis is going to detect any change that's been made, any changes at risk of a code overwrite, and anything that's been deleted. This is always best practice to run before deploying to any org. So if I click on this impact analysis, we can see that I want to take this to my integrated dev org next, and Flosum's detected 3 conflicts. So I'll start with the layout and kind of work my way up here. So if I click on this different, this time our source file again is going to be on our left-hand side, and then our target org is going to be on our right. The reason our target org is going to be on our right-hand side is because this is going to detect any manual changes that your devs and admins were maybe making in that target org. A lot of times those manual changes aren't necessarily reflected in that Git repository, causing risk of a code overwrite. Flosum is the only product on the market that can guarantee that we will detect every change that is at risk of a code overwrite, and your admins and developers can take action ensuring that that is not the case. So Flosum detected 5 differences, and again, using these arrows, we can quickly navigate. And this should look pretty similar to that pull request screen I just showed, except within this impact analysis, we can actually take action. So again, these green fields here, they're net new, no real risk of a code overwrite, and these were part of my user story. Now, this rating field, for example, that might have been one of my peers adding in this manual change in my target org. If I don't want to overwrite that, I can simply click this arrow, bring it back into my source file, ensuring that no code overwrite will happen. So here, I like these changes and I can save, and I'll quickly work through these two as well. So yellow will mean that they exist in both orgs, but they're different. So as part of my user story, I added the after delete and after undelete. So this was intentional. It's just the files are too different. So really no actions needed from me at this time. Looking at my second difference, and here's my is delete and undelete. So here we can see here, there's again, no risk of an overwrite. So these changes were intentional. I'll just save this and working through my class again. I'd update my test class just to meet some criteria. And again, green is a net new, no risk. So I can save this, check these, and save it one last time. So now I'm back at my branch, and we can see that my versions have updated since I've merged the existing components to them. This, by definition, is easily enough for us to validate and deploy to our target org or kick off a pipeline. What I did want to show today is 2 tools that Flosum offers to really help your developers and admins increase their odds of a successful deployment the first attempt. By no means are these tools required. They're just there for you when you need to use them. The first one being is a ViewDependencies. So it's quite literally seeing what dependencies might exist within your branch. So if I click on this ViewDependencies, I selected my dev1 org, which is where I originally configured this user story, just because in my head, that's where the most accurate dependency list will exist in that given time. Flosum has detected 12 total dependencies within my branch, and I'll use this layout as a good example. I can expand here, and I know that 1 web link and then 9 custom fields were referenced in my layout. So naturally, these fields and web link are going to need to exist in my target org or my branch. If neither exist, Salesforce is going to fail this 10 out of 10 times. So if I'm an admin going through here, just spot checking my work, and I'm like, you know what, maybe I did miss this account 4 field or account test 4 field. If that's ever the case, you can simply check this box, create a snapshot, and commit it to your branch all within the same screen. Probably saving your developers 15 to 20 minutes worth of work rather than letting this deployment fail, looking at your error message, and kind of starting this process from the beginning. For this example, I'm not going to do this, which is going to lead me into my next use case. So I'll cancel here. I'm going to go back to my branch. And the next tool I wanted to show you was our deployment analyzer. So again, by no means is this required. It's just there if you need to use it. And deployment analyzer is going to function very similarly to a validation. The only difference is you can actually autocorrect some of your code issues ahead of a validation or deployment. So if I click on this deployment analyzer, my target org I'm going to take this to is integrated dev. And let's analyze. So here we can see that Flosum actually detected 1 missing component, and oddly enough, it's that account test 4 field. So maybe I added this to my page layout in my dev sandbox just for some testing, but I don't necessarily need this in integrated dev, QA, or production. If that's ever the case, you can simply check this box, remove that reference from your layout within the branch, and this will ensure that your deployment will be successful. Deployment Analyzer is also going to be very useful for removing dependencies upon user stories, allowing for that continuous deployment process. So with that being said, now that I know I've resolved any conflicts that might occur, I'm going to kick off my deployment. So going back to my branch now, cancel this. This is easily enough for us to validate and deploy. By nature, the validation and deployment are pretty manual steps. So if you kick off a validation, you kind of have to babysit it, make sure it succeeds. If it does, then manually kick off that deployment. If we do want to automate this process, what we can do is build and configure pipelines. So before I kick off a pipeline, one thing to note is that pipelines, once configured, they're reusable by any developer. So that heavy leg lifting is upfront. After they're configured, it's really smooth sailing. So I'm going to go to a pipeline that I've configured, and this is one of my more complicated ones. So within this pipeline, if the validation of QA succeeds, it's automatically going to kick off that deployment. If that deployment succeeds, I can actually use webhooks to call in some external regression testing, which are my Selenium test scripts. If those test scripts succeed, it's going to complete that exact same process for production. For whatever reason, if these test scripts fail, I can actually roll back my deployment, allowing my admins and developers to take the necessary steps to fix these issues and then kind of restart this process when they're ready. So with that being said, I'm going to kick off a pretty basic pipeline, and this is just the validation and deployment to integrated dev. So with this pipeline, I'll run this, pick my integrated dev one. Let's kick it off. And this could take a minute or two to run just to work through that process. And as we can see here in the top left-hand side, Flosum's automatically taking a backup zip of any components that will be changed or updated, just so in the instance that you ever need to roll back this deployment, we have that backup zip and the current status of those components. So while we wait for this to complete, whenever you kick off a validation, a deployment, a pipeline, or a rollback, this is always going to be logged under your deployment history tab. So here we can see that my pipeline is currently in progress. Flosum is never going to delete these metadata logs. So you have these for eternity for audit tracking purposes and reporting as well. If this validation fails for whatever reason, you can simply click on this metadata log name and you're going to see all of your Salesforce errors that would occur. And if this succeeds, you can see exactly what was created, what was updated, and maybe what was deleted as well. So I did just get the email notification on my phone that the validation was a success. So now we'll just give it a minute or two to let that validation succeed. While we wait for this deployment to successfully deploy, over here on the right-hand side, we have our activities tab, which Flosum will track pretty much every click you do. So this is a good example. If you're working on a feature branch, it might be 2 weeks since you've last looked at it, and you're probably wondering, what have I done? Who's completed what? You can see here that it tracks pretty much everything. A good example of this is we can see that a pull request was created by Mary Jones, and then I've started to actually review these. And then deployment analyzer, impact analysis, all of these were completed by myself. So with that being said, I actually just got the other email notification and my deployment was a success. So here really quickly, I'll click on this deployment log and we can see what exactly was updated or created. Naturally, since this was a success, my deployment error log will be blank. But if I look at the success log, I can see that my number of contacts field, there was no change to it. I just wanted to give field level security for my system admin profile, but then everything else, to the trigger all the way to the layout, they were updated. So I'll click out of this. I'm going to navigate back to my branch now, which is going to lead me into my next use case. Let's pretend that I assigned this requirement to one of my internal QA testers. They get back to me and they're like, this page layout is just terrible. Half the fields are spelled wrong. The related lists are all out of whack. I need to roll this back because the business is not going to approve of this. If this is ever the case, Flosum does offer a 2-click rollback. So working out of this same branch here, here's our rollback. And a rollback can be a full or partial. So the target org I took it to was integrated dev. And that target deployment log is always going to be word for word or number for number under that deployment history tab. So I click on this and I can see exactly which components were migrated. So if it was on that layout that was giving me issues and I need to take it back to my sandbox to rework on that, I could simply just roll this back. But for this demo, I'm going to actually roll back this entire deployment. So again, here's that metadata log, which you go to the details tab. You can quickly navigate to your branch. And you can see that this rollback is actually in progress. So while we wait for this to succeed, I'm actually going to switch to my PowerPoint slide and show you some of our branching strategy and then back promotion to ensure that your developer sandboxes are in sync. So really what I've showed you so far today is committing my changes or pulling my changes in from dev 1 and committing them to my feature branch. From there, we walk through the pull request, static code analysis, impact analysis. Oh, I might have said that twice. And then deploy this to integrated dev. What we see with this process flow is our customers adopt this in some way, shape, or form. By no ways is a concrete flow that your team needs to fall into, since Flosum is extremely flexible, but we see this in most of our customers. So really what we see, it's always best practice in Flosum, one feature branch per user story. So naturally, within a sprint cycle, if you have 5 developers, you could have upwards of over 25 feature branches. Once all these feature branches make it to your integrated dev or QA org, it goes through internal QA testing, you get the thumbs up. What we can do from there is then merge these feature branches into a release branch, ensuring that this release branch is easier to manage and your release managers working out of one branch rather than 25. Once this release branch is eventually deployed to production, the business signs off on it, we can then commit this to our repository, which really serves as our master branch. Now, how does this tie into back promotion? Within Flosum, you can take any org or any branch to any org, granted you have the right org permissions. With that being said, we can take this release branch and simply back promote this, which is just a validation and deployment to our Dev 1, Dev 2, Dev 7 orgs. If you want to automate this process, what you could do is build a pipeline with 2 clicks of a button. You can ensure that every developer has the latest and greatest changes needed to start working on their next sprint cycle. So with the back promotion process, I did want to show you one other tool that Flosum has that can just check to see if you're missing any components in your sandbox or if your orgs are out of sync. So switching back to Flosum, go to my comparison tab, and at any given point in time, your admins and developers can run this, and they can compare any snapshot to snapshot, repo to repo, or org to org. And you're going to get that same side-by-side XML comparison of green's been added, red's been deleted, yellow's been changed. But what Flosum does really well is comparing profile and permission sets. As you know, profile and permission set XMLs can be extremely large, upwards of 800,000 lines, and comparing 2 XMLs side by side is 1, time consuming, and 2, pretty tedious. So Flosum's built out a comparison strictly for these components, and I've built out a use case up here for us. So in this example, I'm going to compare my system admin profile for my Dev2 org and my system admin profile for my QA org, just to see what the differences are. And here we can see that Flosum broke these up into subtabs, pretty similar to how you would configure a permission set. Scrolling down now, we can see that this is my Dev2 profile and this is my QA. Here we know that yellow means that they exist in both orgs, but they're different. So we can see in my Dev2 profile, we have write access to all of these case fields, where in QA we don't. Scrolling down a bit further, we know that red means they exist in one org, but not the other. So if I'm looking at these asset fields, my Dev2 sandbox doesn't have any of these. This might be a good indication that I might not even have my asset object in my Dev2 sandbox, letting me know that I might need to back promote my QA org or some components to my Dev2 sandbox, getting them in sync. With that being said, one of the biggest questions our customers have with our branches is what's the source for it? Where has it gone? Where has it been deployed to? So within our branch, I'm going to show you just that. So within our branches tab, we do have an overview. And this really shows us at a high level what sources have flowed into our branch, which is what I'm currently on. And you can see I had a couple feature branches, and I've taken sources from Dev 1, Dev 2, production, and pre-prod, merged them into my release branch. And then the question is, where has this gone? So here I can see this has actually gone to another branch, and it's actually been unsuccessful at deploying to Dev 2, which can be indicated up here. Looking on the left-hand side here, we know that this red within production means that my production org might be out of sync with my release branch, letting me know that production might be missing some components. So from a high level, your developers, admins, and release managers always really know what's in sync, what's the source, and what it's been taken to. Which again, this can always be reported on, which leads me into my next example of audit tracking purposes and dashboards and reporting. So I'm going to switch back to Flosum, or my Flosum org, and go to my orgs tab. And I'm going to use production as a good example here. So whenever you connect an org to Flosum, we do have audit tracking for every single org right out of the box. And this is going to track any automated changes made and any manual changes. So in this audit trail, this is really going to give you the who, what, when, and where. In this example, we can see that Beth Lopez made a manual change to the duplicate rule in production on November 18th. Now, if you ever see an automated process, you know Flosum was used to deploy this component. Now, the big question is, I did leave out the why. The why, of course, would always be the user story that's attached to your branch, which kind of leads me to my next example of dashboards and reporting. Since everything you see in Flosum is a custom object, a custom page, custom field, that means pretty much everything can be reported on. So if I switch to my dashboard really quick, I can see some custom reports that I built to track who's been making manual changes in my production org, what user has the most org permissions, or you could compare org permissions per user. And then if you wanted to drill down into deployments even further, you could see how many deployments have succeeded versus failed. Of those failed deployments, what component failed the most? Maybe it was your Apex triggers. That might be a good indication that you might need to enforce your static code analysis or pull request. So with that being said, this is really just a high level overview of Flosum and its capabilities.